was even another man joining us. So, oh, maybe Heather will join us, because it was Heather who suggested that hi, Graham.
Hi.
I was just acknowledging that we're an all-male group talking about patriarchy, and it was Heather who chastised us for being such a male-dominated group. And yeah. We're getting some feedback, Graham, which
sounds like a wind.
Okay.
Sounds like the start of a horror movie. Sort of. I don't know, as if the werewolf was about to appear.
Yeah.
But we're just saying that it was Heather who suggested that we broaden out our topics, which we've done tonight. So we may not have succeeded in changing the dynamic of the group, but at least we're changing the conversation a little bit. Yeah. So it's one step. But we should preface everything we say tonight as being acknowledged that we are gender deficient. And the second thing is that we are going to finish 5 minutes earlier today, because Harley and I want to go and see what's on in the chapel, which is Mark Commode's doing his live blog. So forgive us for being very selfish and closing just a little bit early. But I'll share the screen, and I've got a few sort of introductory slides. We can have a conversation about them, and then I want us to look at a story from Mark's Gospel. Yeah. So let me just. Yeah, I've called this just very well. Jesus, Women, and the Subversion of Patriarchy, and that's because it's the second of three series of topics that we're going to do, inspired by both the coronation and the kind of growth of right-wing Christian nationalism in the United States. And last week we saw that conservative national conservatism conference, and talked a little bit about that and the way in which those kind of very far right groups employ Christianity in a sort of rather sentimental way. We also looked at to justify their very narrow view of what the nation is, but also of morality as well, and the inability to recognize diversity in society. And today I want to just kick off with just a few opening definitions, which aren't any more profound than anything you find on Wikipedia, but we'll at least frame our discussion. And the first is to talk about this thing that we talked about last week, which is ethno-nationalism, which is a political ideology, and it's actually quite interesting because it arises from people prioritizing within a state the ethnic or national group, and sort of implying that a particular group should have sovereignty over a specific territory and advocate for the preservation of its cultural linguistic heritage, and an emphasis on the shared identity, common ancestry, sense of belonging among members of a group. Now, that's there are various shades of that, from some very extreme situations, perhaps like the situation in Myanmar at the moment, where the Rohingya Muslims are seen not to have the right to citizenship, because even though they've been living in the country for generations and generations. because it's seen one ethnic group prioritises the territory over another. Or you can look at Wales, you know, and the desire for autonomy, for that sort of Welsh identity. I mean, the famous Welsh nationalist Saunders Lewis said, "Heb iaith, heb cenedl. Without a language, there isn't a nation." And that sort of idea that a territory is given an identity through its people and the cultural identity of its people. So that's one thing that we've got on our plate. The second is that what then we talked about last week again, which is Christian nationalism, where you're talking about religion being the defining characteristic of a nation or a society, and particularly Christian nationalists rooting this in their Christian heritage, the principles, and promote the notion of a Christian nation. Integration of church and state, particularly Christianity, and religious values shape and inform the laws, policies, and institutions of the nations. And the moral, and these people who espouse this, again, there are shades along the way from Justin Welby and King Charles to Jacob Rees-Mogg and etc. But there's a tendency within these groups, particularly in the United States at the moment, to being moral and cultural conservatives, espousing these traditional conservative values and beliefs that align with their interpretation of the Christian text. And this particularly relates to abortion, traditional family structures that challenge their religious beliefs. My typing was really bad in this. And that in the United States at the moment, I think abortion laws, with the changing the ruling on Wade v. Roe, increasingly United States of America is moving to a country in which abortion will be outlawed, not because the people want it. The majority of people in the country are in favor of abortion up to a certain point and in certain circumstances, with various nuances in that, but actually because the Christian nationalists have been so powerful and effective in their use of the law and lobbying to make that the case. And again, this desire to preserve Christian influence on the nation, real concern takes place, and to see the bishops there hanging in there, that the decline of Christian influence in society is of concern and seeks to nurture. They still want to maintain and hold on to that privileged position in society and in public life, and they want kind of policies that reflect religious freedoms for prayer, school, and permission to be hostile to LGBTQ communities. And always with various shades of this, but that desire, particularly on sexual ethics, gender ethics, as being the kind of most important. Less worried about, in the United States, things like the death penalty or whatever. Not worried about the plight of refugees or other areas which are in the mainstream. You wouldn't believe this when you watch you read about Christian in public life, but refugees and the position of refugees is a priority issue in the world church leadership, their ethical pronunciations and so on. But actually what you hear about is all about sexual ethics, which is coming from these very strong lobby groups. And then this kind of question of how that links into this patriarchy. So you've got these kind of big ideas which are around state, but then interspersed with that, interacting with those kind of dynamics in society, and where certain people are pushing society and wanting to hold on to things in society is this social system in which power and authority lie primarily with men, and male dominance in various spheres, including politics, economics, family structures, which reinforces these kind of gender roles. I love that picture. I mean, doesn't that just say it all,
Yeah.
you know? Everything you need to know about tonight's discussion was in that picture. I don't know what Jesus was doing in Sweden, but that's where he was. But, you know, the gender roles, that men are assertive, competitive, and in control, and women are subordinate and expected to be nurturing, caring, submissive. And then these four areas where the gender roles are defined in personality traits, in domestic behavior, in the occupations that people hold, and in physical appearance. You know, I mean, a man should not walk in a certain way, you know. A man should not be effeminate in certain ways. A woman should not be butch, you know. So that's all very, you know, clearly sort of set out. I think that's all I wanted to say. No, one more thing. The sort of intersectionality then of patriarchy and nationalism. Patriarchal values get inserted into the nationalist framework. So that the nationalist framework, emphasizing this, you know, Christian or in other countries, you know, Muslim identity, then imposes itself on women's role in reproduction. It maintains these cultural traditions, which continues to restrict women's role in leadership and decision making. I think. Oh, and then finally, you get this kind of interaction of the four Ps, which I mean, traditionally it's kind of the three Ps: power, profit, product. You know, as the kind of things that create this that kind of societies and the order of society we've got, of the kind of society we're living in, capitalist society. But you add into that mix, you add patriarchy, and you've got a situation where you don't have fluidity in, you don't have freedom for individuals in their lives, and you don't have, and it's such a closely entwined structure that it's very, very hard to dislodge and to move and to make significant change. You can only make change in certain small areas. You might change little policies here and there, but the actual structures of the society are so solid that they're really hard to move. That's my introduction. I mean, I don't know, and then we'll have a little chat about that, and then we'll look at, you know, the Bible story and see if it illuminates anything from there or has any alternative to it. What are your thoughts about those things? Am I talking nonsense?
What you've described about the intersection of patriarchy and nationalism, that was embodied in Nazism, because in theory at least, they were all for very clear gender roles. Women were there basically to reproduce and be in the home, and it was all about nationalism. So I think Nazi Germany does give a very good example of that. And the other one, the fictional one, is if anybody's been following The Handmaid's Tale, that's exactly what's going on there.
I haven't seen it. That's the one where they all wear red.
Yes. Yeah. I mean that's very much, that's what would happen if the very extreme conservatives got in control of a nation, really.
And the Taliban, of course, is
yeah.
There.
The other thing that occurred to me, and then I'll be quiet, sorry, but when we talk about ethno-nationalism, I thought, well, actually, some parts of Europe, must be a very different concept, because if you've been, at one point, you've been part of Poland, then part of Germany, and now you're part of Poland again, or in the case of, whichever part of France it is, it was part of Germany between the wars, and then part of
Alsace-Lorraine.
It must look very different, actually, if you can't look back at a straightforward history of being in one country, inverted commas. So they may feel it's a bit of a luxury to actually, those who can sort of wax lyrical about ethno-nationalism and purity of their race and stuff like that, because a lot of people can't.
And across the world, I mean, you know, the nation states, practically all of the nation states include more than one ethnic group. You know, I mean, you know, Sam in Sweden, is it Sami?
Yes.
Sami, yeah, groups in Sweden. I mean, the Welsh and the Scots in the UK, you know, Cornish, you know, Yorkshire. I mean, all of these groups have some sense of identity, and you couldn't create a nation out of every ethnic group. It would just be absolutely impossible.
But to a certain extent, the nation state is an accident of history, really, I would suggest.
Well, in Africa, it's a product of the 1884 Berlin Conference, you know. It's as simple as that.
And the fact they used a ruler to define the boundaries rather than anything more sophisticated than that.
Absolutely. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of nuance in all of this, you know. But what comes across to me is, particularly when you put those 4 P's together, just how solid it is, you know, and how deeply entwined this kind of capitalist structure is. Who was it said, you can envisage the end of the world, but you can't envisage, what was the quote, Harley? You can envisage
something like you can envisage the end of the world, but you can't envisage the end of capitalism, something like that, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know who said it?
No, I can't remember.
Probably someone, I don't know, some very kind of pessimistic German philosopher, German social critic.
Of whom there are many. Yeah, interesting. Well, I mean, should we just? Does anybody want to say any more about this?
Like this about this sort of thing that exists in marketing. It sounds like it could be sort of marketing slogan. You know. Yeah.
Oh, the 4 P's.
Product, price, place, promotion, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's a very similar thing.
But that marketing is absolutely entwined in the whole capitalist project as well, you know.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. Right. Okay. Let's read a Bible story and try and work on that and see if just have a sort of juxtaposition of, you know, that broad understanding of, you know, how societies are structured and the power structures that go on, and how gender roles are implemented by interact with the bigger social structure, and that it isn't all about just individual prejudice or individual choices in behavior. These things are imposed upon us, you know. I mean, those gender roles are imposed upon us, you know, that, and they're imposed upon us to maintain this kind of order of a particular nature and style of society. And whether Jesus was envisaging, you know, an accommodation with that kind of society, or was he envisaging something that was quite different? Now we know this is not, he was not talking about nationalism because the concept of nation did not exist, you know, just can't conceive of it at the time of Jesus. Next we will look at Jesus in Rome and his relationship with Rome. But now we'll just look at a Bible story. That one, I think. Yeah. No, that's wrong. Sorry. I just need to find the Bible. Can you see this? Yeah. Would you like to read it, Harley?
Why not? Turn your mic off, please. Thanks. Just so Mark 7:24 through 30. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, Syrophoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone.
It's a great story. I mean, it's a great story. I mean, lots of challenges in it. I mean, how would you sort of react, first of all, to the relationship between Jesus and the woman?
Well, we all know that this one has been accused of being a racist passage, but it's quite interesting, actually, this idea that even if the word is for the people of Israel, that doesn't mean that that word doesn't escape Israel and filter out into the surrounding regions and cultures, which I think is the sort of challenge to nationalism, perhaps, in there. I don't know, maybe I'm just reading ahead too much.
No. I mean, sorry. I'm almost to get back. I mean, it's just, she answers, even the dogs under the table eat the crumbs. And, was Jesus giving crumbs? Or, is the relationship, what is the relationship between Jesus and the woman in relationship to equality? I mean, is this an equal relationship? I mean, what's going on?
Oh, no, at first it doesn't seem like it, but yeah, I don't know. But I think what's his name? I think Miguel de la Torre talks about this passage. Sorry, I don't want to get off the subject of patriarchy, but quite dangerous. He says that Jesus basically does wrong and then realizes he did wrong and sort of apologizes for doing wrong. He has some very unusual opinions about the Bible.
I mean, she answers him back, which is quite a bold thing to do culturally, I think, in that context, both as a woman and then to answer back to somebody who's recognized as a teacher. And good for her, she does. And as Carly says, he responds to that and effectively apparently changes his position.
I mean, she starts there by bowing down at his feet, and she hears, she's got a problem. I mean, her daughter has this unclean spirit, and she hears about his reputation, and she bows down at his feet. So she has an expectation of exorcism. She has an expectation that Jesus will heal. And when he sort of says no, she insists on her right. If you're going to heal other people, heal my daughter. So she actually stands up to him. She protests. This is not fair. This is not just. you know, you're only offering this great thing, which is exorcism, you know, killing these evil spirits, you know. And in Mark's gospel, there's always a kind of a broader kind of social dimension to the evil spirits. You know, remember the pigs over the cliff top, you know, and the legion and so on. There's that sort of exorcism is more than just a few individuals. It's the exorcism that's needed to create the kingdom of God. And she's saying this should be available to us as well.
I mean, quite interesting. Like Jesus, almost, you could read it as Jesus challenging her almost, and it does appear quite problematic at first. It's the way in which he's doing that, but certainly to challenge someone, I think, is to treat them as an equal, really. Anyway.
I mean, that's the startling thing about the story, that Jesus gives in.
Yeah.
You know, that he can... Graham.
I think you get the feeling that, well, I certainly do, that Jesus is making it up as he goes along.
Yes. Yeah, you do that. Yeah, it's an interesting dialogue. I mean, it's a conversation that is development, isn't it? It doesn't just start somewhere and just stay in the same point. The point develops and the positions change. So she's bowing down at his feet to start with, but then she's going home, standing up straight and finding her child. You know, she's a supplicant at the start, but she's not at the end. You know, she finds her child, the demon's gone, she's in a different position, she's in a different place. So, and her status has changed, you know. Who she is as a woman is changed, you know, as a result of the encounter. I mean, just for context, I mean, this region of Tyre is, you know, outside of the boundaries of Israel. He's in Gentile territory. It's I guess, well, Syro-Phoenician, as in, you know, Syria, modern day Syria, and Lebanon, southern Lebanon, you know, the gospel writers making it very clear that the woman is part of the Hellenized world, not the Jewish world, you know. So all of that matters a lot. And she's a pagan, she's not Jewish, and her behavior is definitely an affront to the Jewish culture. She's a woman, she's a non-Jew. She's interrupting his privacy as well. He's gone into a house to rest, and whenever Jesus tries to rest, he never succeeds. People come and get him in Mark's gospel, and she too is interrupting his privacy. And then the dogs, you know. I mean, what a thing to say, you know. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs, the children of Israel, presumably, and throw it to the dogs. That's the sticking point, isn't it, in this, you know? The insults, it sort of dramatizes the ethnic, the cultural, the socio-political hostility between Jews and the Gentiles at that point. And Jewish writers often refer to Gentiles as dogs, but more in the sense of their moral behavior, not their ontological, you know, reality, but in terms of their ethical behavior.
Like the way James Cone, for example, would have written about white people. Similar, would you say?
Who would have written?
Oh no, I mean, just comparable in a way, maybe the way James Cone would have written about white people. Like, you know, it's not that I hate white people racially. It's that,
there's a whole pattern of behaviour which exemplified by the term white, you know, that is seen to be acceptable, unacceptable. Colonizing behaviour is categorizing white. It does not mean that every white person is, you know, is in the right, is wrong or evil or whatever. But it is this collective thing. So yes, that's exactly the sort of way in which that term dogs would be used, I guess. Okay. So basically, you know, it is a ethno-nationalist argument that Judaism has the right to defend its boundaries. It seems to be what Jesus is saying here. I'm wondering if we can just, if I can do this. I hadn't thought about doing it this way, but let's see if I can. Going back in the Gospel, we go. I mean, there's a story of an exorcism, the story of the Gerasene demoniac, where the exorcism definitely seems to have a relationship to the wider political reality. And then a woman is healed. Yeah, here. This is the story of a woman restored to life, a girl restored to life. It's one of these passages which is bracketed. So the first paragraph is Jairus coming to ask for his healing of his daughter. So we get this parallel with the story that we've just read. That here he's a leader of the synagogue named Jairus comes. So a Jewish leader comes and asks for the healing of his daughter, and then the daughter is healed. So they think the child is dead but not sleeping. So in chapter 5, a very similar story takes place, which tells of the healing of the daughter of a leader of the Jewish synagogue. And then in chapter 6, we read of the feeding of 5,000 people. Oh, hang on, there's one thing I forgot to say about the daughter. At the end of that story, the story of the healing of Jairus' daughter, we read this. He strictly, last sentence, he strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. Okay. Then in chapter 6, we have the story of the feeding of the 5,000. So the people of Israel, you know, the Jewish followers of Jesus are fed. So the feeding theme follows through. And the people, from where it says, oh, Peter's gone and come out again. And it says, and they all ate and were filled. So the feeding takes place in chapter 6, and the people are satisfied, they're filled. And then we come to chapter 7, and this time a discussion about food takes place, but this time with the healing of a Gentile. Okay? And so she does get the food. The daughter gets the food. They get the crumbs from under the table. And then in chapter 8, what do we get? we get the story of the feeding of the 4,000. And the feeding of the 4,000 takes place on the other side of the lake. That takes place to in the more Gentile kind of area. So you get this theme of feeding moving, feeding through. So this thing about the crumbs under the table and the food and giving food to the dogs and all of that rest of the conversation, we normally see just in the context of that tiny little story. But actually, you might see it also as the way in which a theme is following through, that the food is being brought to the Jewish people and then gradually becoming more universal. And but I don't know if that makes any sense to you.
No, it seems to very, very clever storytelling, if it was intended. Very clever. Yeah.
Yeah. Is this connecting with what we're talking about, which is the sort of patriarchy, nationalism, are the kind of dynamics of this story ones that we can kind of learn from?
Well, if we're sort of understanding the Syrophoenician woman as someone who Jesus kind of either learns to see differently or just behaves towards differently upon her challenging him. I don't know. And just the way that moves out of Israel and then through this woman, and I don't know. Maybe she's that important. Maybe she's kind of instigates Gentile mission in some sense. I don't know.
Does feel like a pivoting. Because you see afterwards, just immediately afterwards, in that Jesus cures a deaf man. Then he returns from the region of Tyre, went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. So he moves over into the Hellenized world for the next bit, which is about the curing of a deaf man, opening the ears. So actually, this tendency to think of Jesus' mission as being pretty well exclusively to the Jewish nation, Jewish people, Israel, and certainly there's a mission there. And then when we get to Paul, Book of Acts, and you get to Paul in chapter, from chapters, 12, 13, 14 onwards, 15, and the Pauline mission moving outwards, that's when it seemed to be the Gentile mission beginning, chapter 10 with Cornelius in Acts and so on. But actually, in Mark, maybe you're getting more subtly a way in which this is really about an opening out of beyond the boundaries of Judaism, challenging the boundaries of Judaism, opening up, fulfilling the prophetic challenges, and at the same time moving into a completely different way of understanding how identity comes. I don't know if I'm not quite sure the point I'm trying to make. But.
I think Jesus.
Well, I think there are two big questions behind all this, and one of them is who is allowed to talk. The other is who is allowed to eat.
Wow! Can you say more? That's so important. Wow.
Well, the Syrophoenician woman is talking out of turn. She comes to see Jesus on her own account. She hasn't been introduced by anybody else. She just bluffs her way in, and she says stuff. And you know, and it's you know, and speaking is very important in Judaism, because that's what you because, you know, this sort of, you know, creation myths are all about God talking and bringing stuff about, for example. And then, you know, also who's allowed to eat, because, you know, there's a sort of Jewish dietary restrictions put a barrier between Jews and Gentiles. And here, you know, here this woman is actually, you know, insisting on her right to be there, and insisting on her right to be there by means of a you know, referring to the food laws.
Yeah. That is so interesting. Because and all this kind of the purity stuff is sort of implied there, isn't it? You know, the dogs and eating under the table and all the rest of it. And she goes away satisfied. I mean, you know, the people that feeding of the 5,000 go away filled. You know, she goes away satisfied. She, you know, you know, and yeah. So I mean, it is about shifting the dynamics of relationships, and I, you know, you feel how you just said it, Graham, how she just barges in, and she's very polite, but nevertheless, she's insistent. She knows what she wants, and she knows the change, and she's claiming the right that she has. And whether or not, looking at the kind of earlier discussions that we had, you know, is it not important that people claim their rights? And what is the right that they're claiming? I mean, some people would say the right is to be a nation, the right to ethnic identity, the right to not be oppressed, you know, the right not to have to be forced into a particular role. What is the right that we have? What is the claim that we want to make on Christ in the middle of all of this debate? What is the claim that we would make on Christ? You know, I mean, I think Christian nationalists make a claim that Christ supports them. You know, Christ supports our argument. Christ supports our political party. Christ supports our ethnicity. Christ supports our gender. What claim do we want to make on Christ? That is not just more of the same.
I think I'd want to say that Christianity transcends nationalism.
Yeah.
And that's why I can never really understand Christian nationalism, because the whole, I guess ever since I've been involved in the church, partly because of my particular background, but I always thought of Christianity as being transnational. So I've never understood how people could see it as a buttressing thing of supporting nationalism. And I do think in this country, the establishment of the Church of England does do that unwittingly. I think they actually, and they're involved with the coronation and things like that, unwittingly are basically supporting nationalism and an understanding, almost a religious understanding of nationalism. But I think when I read the New Testament, Jesus never says anything about nationalism at all.
No. And here it is a discussion about the boundaries of you know, what are the boundaries of Judaism? What is the boundary of Israel? What is the boundary, you know, that Jesus you know, is, I mean, he's fulfilling, you know, this is Israel's hour, you know, he goes to Jerusalem, cleanses the temple and all the rest of it. So he's doing something which is about Israel, but he's also challenging the boundaries, you know, of Israel, you know. And maybe we just have to do the same, that you cannot accept the boundaries of your own nation. You can respect them, but at the same time, you cannot see them as being just solid. You can't build a fortress around either your neighborhood, you can't build a fortress around your country, or your values. You can't even put you shouldn't even put a wall around, a boundary around church and Christian faith. You've got to be, everything's got to be much more porous and much more fluid, because in that fluidity, actually what you can find is a common meal, which Jesus was working towards, a communion meal, and a genuine communion meal is one which embraces more than just your own kind.
Also this thing of, very much also in Jesus' theology of just letting go, isn't it? Not kind of holding on to things, not holding on to a way of being, or it's very much it's sort of, it's just letting go, isn't it? And the kind of selflessness of Christ and his ability to let go and just follow. This thing that Christ offers to us, this way that he offers us.
And I think in identity politics, there has to be, there's a lot of great, really important stuff in identity politics, but there has to be a point at which you are prepared to let go of your identity for the sake of, being part of a wider community. Not denying your identity. That's different. But I think in humility, letting go and not being prepared to assert it over and above others. Equality with others is different, but equality with the other, if you are the other, equality with others, but not a sense of superiority or a sort of claim as a distinguished base.
Yeah.
But that's. So, were you going to say something, Graham?
Well, I think it's. You also have to bear in mind that the Roman Empire was successfully multi-ethnic in a way in which the British Empire wasn't. And and for example, think of St. Augustine, for example. He was a North African, and he became, I think, very prominent in Mediterranean culture, and in the church, but also he was able to do a lot of traveling and so on because of the way that the Roman Empire was organized.
And Paul as well. Yeah. Rajan, we're going to be winding up in a couple of minutes, and you'd be very, I know you wanted to listen, but did you want to bring anything in to this?
There's something I was really thinking a lot about. One of the books I've been reading recently, among others, is Tainted Democracy. And I might mispronounce her name, so my apologies, but Susanna Selenyi, and she was the colleague of Viktor Orban quite early on in Hungary, and particularly prominent before the move towards what could be described as Christian nationalism and populism. And I thought what was really interesting on this theme of speaking up was that in the book, she talks about an instant where they were getting a tremendous amount of popular support, and she and some of her friends, they're all very young, all under the age of 30 at that time, they went away, and because she was a psychologist, she did a piece of work where she was trying to look at the potential of the groupthink that was going on in their little sort of party that they were developing and how they could challenge themselves from within. So she wrote this kind of satirical piece called The Rise of the Coneheads. And she brought it back, to Orban and everybody else, thinking this would be a really interesting discussion. And that was an incredible turning point, that she and the other people that were involved in writing this challenging, but what they thought was a really constructive little sort of way of being able to ask, are we getting too insular? Meant that they were then excluded and seen as being, not one of them, using that phrase that's happened. So I just thought it was a really interesting parallel that really struck me, that segment, that turning point in that book. And this idea that in this particular piece, somebody is encouraged to speak up, to challenge the concept of the group, and to be kind of respected for that. So
yeah, that's a really good conclusion. Actually, it's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. I think we'll. I don't know if Peter's still with us, but I think we'll close it there for those of us who want to nip into the chapel and listen to what's on there. But that's been really good. And next week we'll look at Jesus and Rome, and we'll look at the confrontation between Pilate and Jesus in John's Gospel.